All right, so as I said just a second ago, we were coming back to talk about monoamines. And monoamines are involved in emotional behavior and also circadian rhythm, whether you're awake or sleepy. And we have a bunch of these we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about dopamine and norepinephrine and epinephrine, serotonin, and histamine. Okay, and they have a very profound effect on your ability to on how you feel, Okay, so with dopamine is one that is all about feeling good, and it's excitatory. And when I have to explain this. We make reference in my slide here, whatever slide this is, I guess the 8th slide. I make reference to cocaine, and so and I say that it blocks the transport of dopamine. So if you remember acetylcholine from muscles, we had said it goes across the synapse and it binds to a receptor, which causes a nerve impulse to pass over the muscle and the muscle to contract. And we had said, what stops that? Well, we took it, you removed it from the synaptic cleft. Okay, so dopamine goes across the synaptic cleft, binds, makes you feel good, and then you remove it, unless you take cocaine. And in the case of cocaine blocks the removal, so you feel even gooder. So that's why you get the high. The high from it has to do with cocaine blocking the removal of the dopamine. So instead of just having a normal, I feel pretty good today, you feel great, or so I've been told. Anyway, moderate levels of dopamine, causes euphoria. Really high levels can cause psychotic behavior. One of the things, we have Parkinson's disease, and Parkinson's disease is a disease where the neurons that are producing produce dopamine as their neurotransmitter substance become destroyed. And I remember, this always reminds me of a movie called Awakenings. And it was a story that relates to these different neurons. And it was a story where Robin Williams was this doctor, and there was this period of time when people would go into a coma, and it wouldn't kill them. They would, like a 15-year-old or a 20-year-old person would go into a coma, and they would be in a coma for 40 years and, eventually become old and die. And he found out that if he administered, stimulated the remaining dopamine secreting nerves, that he could wake these people up. And this is based on a true story. And what happened is that they would wake up and be like, oh my God, I'm 40? The last time they were awake, they were 15 years old. And then the bad thing was, though, eventually this treatment was only a temporary treatment, and they'd eventually go back to sleep and, in a coma for the rest of their lives. So this is a story that kind of relates to these dopamine producing neurons. We have some others. We have norepinephrine. Norepinephrine is also an excitatory neurotransmitter substance. When we talk about the ADHD, so attention deficit hyperactivity disorder drugs, what do? They do the same thing as that cocaine, except they're having an effect on norepinephrine. And what did we say? They make the effect of the norepinephrine that's being produced, they make it longer lasting by slowing down the removal of the norepinephrine from the synaptic cleft. Amphetamines are another drug of abuse. We talk about a lot of them here when we talk about these monoamines. Why? Because monoamines are involved in emotions and how you feel, right? And so what do? They inhibit the removal of norepinephrine from the synaptic cleft. And it does things like decrease your appetite, increases alertness, increases your ability to concentrate and perform physical tasks. The bad side to it is insomnia, tremors, anxiety, panic, aggression. These are some really nasty kinds of effects from them. Another one, serotonin. One of my colleagues did a fairly major, well, he got a second master's degree based on a literature review related to psychological addiction. Psychological addiction, not physical addiction, psychological addiction. And the neurotransmitter substance that is really connected, highly connected with psychological addiction is serotonin. And so what serotonin does is it's released in response to drug-seeking behaviors. So in the drug-seeking behavior, the people, you get a large pulse of this serotonin, so much more than even like when you see a loved one, that people that are really into to drugs, they're just, that's the main thing in their life is to get these drugs. And what's interesting about it is it's released in anticipation of doing the drugs, not the actual doing it. So the effect is prior to doing the drugs. Anxiety disorders, a lot of the anxiety disorder drugs try to inhibit the removal of serotonin from the synaptic cleft. And again, some of the drugs of abuse that increase serotonin are things like LSD and ecstasy. So they're going to be blocking serotonin removal from the synaptic cleft. Okay, so we have another one. We have one more we're going to talk about here in the monoamines, and it's called adenosine. And adenosine is inhibitory on learning and memory in the central nervous system, and it's going to inhibit glutamate. And so as a result of that, remember we said glutamate is all about learning, and so this is inhibiting to learning. So it has a hyperpolarizing effect on the neurons that would be secreting glutamate. And so adenosine produces drowsiness. Do you know what blocks adenosine receptors? Caffeine. So when you are drinking coffee and it's waking you up, what you're doing is you're blocking adenosine, which is having a negative effect on the glutamate secreting neurotransmitter substances. All right, I'm going to stop right here and we'll come back and we'll do start on neuropeptides.